We discussed how this is the time of the year that quite often people focus on Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is all about growth, and we've given classes in the past. If you want Be'ezrat Hashem, I'm giving one tonight. We could record it about the Ten Commandments, and the essence of the Aseret HaDibrot is all about respect and being a good person. And quite often we would think being a good person is dependent on what we think is ethical and what we think is correct. But we look to our fathers, we look to Pirkei Avot to get guidance as to what is the right way to act. Torah is not only about kosher and prayer and sacrifices. There's so many timely lessons that we're able to learn from the Torah. So I figured we maybe go through a few Mishnayot over here and just understand. Last time we discussed, if I'm not mistaken, Yoshua ben Prachya. That time period was a very rocky time period. It's right after the times of the Maccabees, and basically that couple hundred years till the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, very, very challenging time period for the Jewish people. We would almost call them the Reform, are in power, and they influence the king Yanai HaMelech. So you have two rabbis. There was Yoshua ben Prachya and Ittai Arbeli. Then you have Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach. And we'll probably be able to get through these two, and then hopefully another one or two. Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach kimu behem. They received from Nitai Harbeli and Yoshua ben Prachya. Yehuda ben Tabai omer, Al tas asmecha k'orchre hadinin. Don't make yourself, in Hebrew modern terminology for a lawyer is orech din. It's a lawyer. Orech just means la'aroch, to have organized. The din, the judgment. In Judaism, there's no concept of a lawyer. It doesn't exist. That concept doesn't exist because there's not really supposed to be lawyers. There's supposed to be the plaintiff, the defendant. They go to the rabbis, and the rabbis are able to just pick up, based on what is being said by the litigants, exactly who's right and who's wrong. When you get lawyers involved, let's be honest and blunt, you get certain lawyers involved, they're very good at what they do, and therefore they're able to, potentially distort the facts or able to present things in a certain way that might not be 100% emet. So, he says, don't make yourself like a judge. In Judaism, there's no such thing as jail. Jail doesn't exist. I don't know exact numbers, but I remember one time I have with my credit card, it comes with the priority pass. And before Corona, I used to do a lot of traveling, and I'm sitting, the priority pass gets you into a lot of the different lounges. So I was flying back from visiting family in America, and I'm sitting in the lounge, and there's this guy, and we start schmoozing, and he tells me that he was the head of I think he was in Minnesota. He was the head of the correctional facility for extreme prisoners. And I said, how much does it cost the taxpayers, how much does it cost the government per person in these high maximum security facilities? And I think he said it was upwards of $70,000 per person. The statistics, I believe, are someone who's in jail, over 70% of the time ends up back in jail. Jail doesn't work. You take somebody who's a thief, who doesn't have the proper upbringing, and then you surround him with many more thieves, chances are it's not going to make him a better person. We don't have these concepts. In the Torah, you see that when the Mikalel, the guy who cursed, they needed to give him a death penalty, weren't sure which one, so they put him in jail for a day. So they figured out, does he need skila, serefa, hereg, cheneg, which death penalty does he get? But lawyers, it's not the way it's supposed to be. And jail doesn't work. We don't have a concept of jail in Judaism. We give lashes, even though some people might think it's more inhumane. And the reality is, for most people, it's more likely to deter them from stealing. And at the same time, if they do get caught stealing, they'd probably prefer the lashes than spending 6 months in jail. So it deters you more, and it probably is your chosen punishment. But when it comes to judgments, you need to be very, very careful. Don't make yourself a judge. Every single time we talk to people, ultimately we're judging them. Right? I'm a guy, so we don't necessarily judge the way other people look. But my understanding is when a woman sees another woman, subconsciously she's checking out her outfit, checking out the shoes, checking out the bag, and judging them, not necessarily for good or for bad. Would that look good on me? Is it? We judge people without even thinking about it, and we're often the judge. My kid comes to me crying, right? My 5-year-old son, he hit me, right? Human nature, instinctively, you want to call over the other kid and punish the other kid. You need to stop and ask yourself, what just happened here? So I'll always say, can you tell me why he's crying? Can you tell me why she's crying? And quite often my son will be like, well, I was playing with this toy and he wanted it and he took it away from me, so I grabbed it back and I pushed him down. And I'll look at the kid who's crying and be like, you left that part of the story out, right? We're always judging. You need to be smart in the way that you assess the situation. And when the people are standing in front of you, you need to assume that both these people are lying. Both these people are wrong. That way, when you assume, you have a very special woman, Rabbi Kanievsky, Alei Shalom, she comes in front of you and someone says, she did this to me. Because you're already judging her positively. Because you know so many nice, beautiful things about her, and she's so amazing and so special. You need to look at everybody as if they're guilty. That way, you fine-tune every single thing they say. When they leave from in front of you, if you're judging this case, you need to look at them and say, they're both good people. Even though before I was looking at them both negatively and both guilty. No. For the court case, I had to, when I'm dealing with them, I had to look at it and hear it in a certain way. But, human nature is you need to hear both sides of the story. You have to hear both sides of the story. I had somebody call me up this week and they were trying to help this divorced couple and things were actually going pretty well. And even though it was very messy, they've now made it that it's good. And then somebody else got involved and this person is a professional and they got involved and they're rocking the whole boat and they wasted 6 months of progress. And, the person that I'm talking to said, it seems to me that this professional wants to get involved so they can get paid. I said, I'm only hearing your side of the story. I need to hear what the professional says and why that professional got involved. So now this professional doesn't know who I am and chances are they wouldn't respect what I have to say. So you need to find a man or a woman or a dayan or a rabbi that they'll respect. Have that person call up, hear this professional side of the story. You can't only listen to one side of the story. When I was living in Israel, my first year I lived in Har Nof in Jerusalem, and I was renting a furnished apartment. And there was one chair, I sat on the chair, and the chair broke. Right? Now, that always makes you feel great about your weight, but it was just, I sat on the chair, So I said to the landlord, as far as I know, I would think you just need to buy another chair. And the landlord says, sounds good, just ask a rabbi to confirm. So I'm walking down the street in Har Nof, and I see the son of Chacham Ovadia, Rabbi David Yosef. He has a whole series of books called Halacha Berura, massive tzaddik, Talmid Chacham, and he knows it all. So I said, can I ask the rabbi a question? He says, sure. I said, I'm renting a furnished apartment. I sat down on the chair, it broke. Who has to pay? It sounds to me like the landlord should have to pay. He says, oh, it's a money question? I can't answer you unless both people are here. I said, no, it's a simple question. And the landlord said, it sounds right, and I'm probably right, just to confirm. He says, I didn't work that way. Anything to do with money, I must hear both sides. You want to ask me something kosher, I'll answer. You want to ask me what's my opinion? No problem. You want to ask me certain things? Fine. But when this money, you can't only hear one side of the story. That's a rabbi who has experience, who understands people ask questions in a certain way and people say things in a certain way. And if the other guy was here, they might not have said it that way. They wouldn't have the chutzpah or the audacity to say this when it's not necessarily that true. Right? So you have to be a judge in everything in life. You're judging. You're judging. You hear that there's school politics, shul politics, organizational politics, family politics. The reality is when your friend's telling you this happened and that happened, you're judging. You're only hearing one side of the story. You need to look at the person who's telling you their side of the story as if they're guilty. And when they're both sides, both of them are guilty. That way you can really dissect what they're saying to find out the truth. But when they leave, you need to look at them and say, she's righteous, she's good. I understand why she's saying what she's saying and where she's coming from. And not only that, especially if it's an actual court case, they accepted the judgment. They said, you know what? I accept that even though I thought this should be the case, I have my point of view. And I am nogea b'davar. I have a conflict of interest. And of course, I feel X. Someone came to me this week saying, oh, my boss agreed to pay me this, but I think I should get that. I said, you're only saying your part of the story. And nowhere in the world would agree with you. But what about A, B, C, D, and E? You're right. There's a story, I don't think we mentioned last week, about a rabbi. And this rabbi, he was being taken to court. Now, in his own town, everybody knew him, and they felt it would be hard. So he went a few towns over. And he comes in front of the Dayan, and he says, based on this Gemara, based on this Psak and this Halacha, based on this, and this, I should win. And the judge hears the whole court case, hears both sides, and says to the rabbi, I'm sorry, you're wrong. He says, what do you mean? What about all the proofs I have? And he says, you should know, there's a rabbi lives a few towns over, and he just put out a book 2 years ago, and he brings all the proofs you're saying, but then he brings one disproof that shows why all those proofs are wrong. He says, who's this rabbi? And he says the name, and it's the rabbi that's standing right in front of him. And the guy says, I can't believe it, that's me. I was so nogea b'davar, but I wrote the book, literally. I gave this answer for someone else. But when I was involved, I couldn't even see that we're human beings. So of course, when your friend's telling you something, and it's so obvious to you that everybody in the world would say that she's wrong, you have to figure out how to say it in the right way. When your kid says, but it's not fair and it's not right, and how come she gets this and I get that, and how come he... You're being a judge. You need to hear both sides of the story, and you need to say both of these guys are guilty. Both these kids are wrong, but when you then give them the punishment, the verdict, the answer, whatever it might be, say no, they're not bad. They're human beings. And therefore, I need to be very careful. And the next Mishnah is also somewhat similar. Shimon ben Shetach says, be very, very careful when you are examining the witnesses. Now, Shimon ben Shetach, he had a terrible situation happen to him. I saw it in Rashi, in Masechet Kiddushin, in the 4th chapter. There's a very, I think 4th, 3rd chapter. There's a very long Rashi. Rashi tells the story of Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach, there was 80 different witches, real witches that knew witchcraft, and the Torah says, Mechashefa lo techayeh, might even be this week's parasha, Mechashefa lo techayeh, someone that's distorting the way Hashem set up the world. Why is it that you can't graft fruits, that you can't breed animals and interbreed? Hashem set up the world in a certain way. You start changing that. Now again, if somebody grafted a fruit, you're allowed to eat it. They put together the apple and the pear, and now you have a Chinese pear and it tastes like an apple or whatever. You can eat it, but you shouldn't be the one doing that. You shouldn't be changing it. A witch, a sorcerer comes and they're changing the way Hashem set up the world to distort it and put it in their favor and make it a certain way. So you have 80 different witches, and they are doing witchcraft, and they're in this cave, and Shimon ben Shetach finds out about them. Now he knows if he goes in, they'll use their witchcraft, they'll take him down. So he gets 80 different people, and he says, you wait over here. When I give you the signal, you come in. Shimon ben Shetach walks into these witches. They don't know that he's a rabbi. They don't know who he is. And he says, wow, what you're doing here is amazing, but I'm a much more powerful sorcerer than you. They say, what do you mean? And they start doing all these different things and showing him their witchcraft. He says, I can make 80 men appear just by whistling. They're like, nah, it's not possible. He says, watch this. He whistles, and the 80 men come in, and each one stands next to one of the witches. And he whistles again, and the women, they're not scared because they just think it's part of the show. He gives a second whistle, and quickly the men grab the women and pick them up. Once they pick them up, Kabbalistically, I don't know why, but this is how it works, they're not mechubar lekarka, they're not connected to the ground. And if they're not connected to the ground, then they can't use their tumah, they can't use the impurity. And they end up taking these witches and they end up killing them. Right? We see this concept also by the makot. We see the sorcerers, the Khartoumim in Egypt, by the plague of lice, they say, wow, etzba Elokim hi. This is the finger of God. This is God's work. This isn't just regular witchcraft. They were able to do the makkah, the plague of blood. They were able to do the makkah of frogs. They weren't able to do lice. Our rabbis tell us there was so much lice on the ground that you couldn't even walk on the ground. And once the sorcerers weren't able to stand on the ground, they weren't mechubar lekarka, therefore they weren't able to do it. And they said, if this is happening, this must be that this is not just regular, this must be that this is actually God's work. It's the same thing over here, that they, the sorcerers, these witches weren't connected to the ground, and therefore they were able to kill them. Because these 80 witches got killed, some of their family members were very upset, and they hired witnesses to testify falsely against the son of Shimon ben Shetach, and they did a great job testifying that Shimon ben Shetach's son is deserving of murder, and Bet Din decides we need to put to death Shimon ben Shetach's son, his own son. As they're taking Shimon ben Shetach's son out to be executed, he looks at the witnesses, he says, you know and I know that this is false. I'm going to be going to Gan Eden, but you, my friends, you're going to be going to Gehenna for killing an innocent man. One of the witnesses hears that, it pierces his heart, and he says, I admit that I lied, I admit. Shimon ben Shetach is euphoric, unbelievable. You see, my son is innocent. Shimon ben Shetach's son, who's being led out to death, says, Dad, that's not the halacha. The halacha is, Kivan shehegid, shuv eno chozeru magid. Right? We have early morning learning in the Bet Midrash and Chazak every morning. In the Bet Midrash, we're doing Masechet Makot just yesterday, or 2 days ago. We did this Gemara. It discusses, once the witnesses testify, they can't come back and testify again. For sure not one, but in general. You don't make yourself a rasha. They can't retract their testimony. And especially here, it's one witness. So, Shimon ben Shetach says, but you're innocent. He's admitted that he's guilty and that he lied. Doesn't matter. That's against the halakha. And if you make a loophole now, then you start making loopholes, it'll be everywhere. And they end up executing Shimon ben Shetach's son. What does he say? Be very, very careful. There's a lot of corruption going on, and you need to be very careful when you investigate the witnesses. And be very careful when you talk. When you talk, the way you ask the questions might lead people to lie. As judges, and even as parents, grandparents, we need to be attuned to the way people say certain things and pick up on the nuances to be able to know who's telling the truth and who's not. One of my favorite malbims is the story about Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech's a 12-year-old kid. 12-year-old kid now takes over as the leader of the Jewish people. Who's going to respect a 12-year-old kid, especially after his dad, David HaMelech, 70-year-old man, just passed away, won all these wars. Hashem comes to Shlomo HaMelech and says, would you prefer immense wealth? Would you prefer immense power? Or wisdom? And eventually Shlomo HaMelech picks wisdom. He knows if I have wisdom, I'll also have the power and I'll also have the wealth. And when the Gemara discusses in Megillah, Achashverosh, it says Achashverosh ruled Mehodu va'Atkush, is he the king of the whole world or not? And the Gemara there says there was a few kings over the whole world. And the Gemara asks, well, what about Shlomo HaMelech? He says, no. Shlomo HaMelech wasn't just over the king over this world. He was also the king over the animal world and the demon world. And the Gemara brings over there a story with Ashmedai, or not over there actually in Gittin, with Ashmedai and the king of the demons, etc. Shlomo HaMelech, 12-year-old kid, and he has the wisdom. How did he prove to everybody he has the wisdom? So we all know a famous story in the Navi. These two women come, they were flatmates, and each one had a newborn baby, and each one went to sleep, and one of them unfortunately suffocated her baby, and the other one didn't. And they both come, and one says, mine is the dead one, mine is the live one, hers is the dead one. In the middle of the night, she came and she swapped babies. I know my baby. The other one says, no. Hers is the dead one, mine's the live one. I know my baby and this is my baby. And Shlomo HaMelech famously says, what do? We need to cut this baby in half because we can't figure out who's the rightful mom. And the real mom says, no. Don't kill my baby. Better that my baby lives with her than not live at all. Shlomo HaMelech says that's a real mom. Says the Malbim, before Shlomo HaMelech even said we should cut the baby in half, he already knew who was the real mom. Says the Malbim, because he was a true judge, he had the wisdom to understand how to pick up the nuances of testimony. And it repeats a couple of times. One woman said, B'ni achai u'b'necha met. Your son, my son is alive, your son is dead. V'hashniya omeret, and the second one says, B'necha met u'b'ni achai. Yours is the dead one, mine's the live one. And they're going back and forth and back and forth. Says the Malbim, Shlomo HaMelech heard. One lady kept saying, yours is the dead one, mine's the live one. And the other one kept saying, my baby is the live one, yours is the dead one. If I'm from New York, right? Now I support the baseball team that's less popular called the New York Mets. And if you're a Met fan, by definition, I'm told that you have to hate the Yankees. That's just the way it works. If someone goes around saying, I hate the Yankees are terrible, and the Mets are good, they care more about the Yankees being terrible than their team being good. They'd rather the other team does bad. Arsenal's terrible, Tottenham's the best. Right? You'd rather put down someone else's team than big up your team. If you go around saying, my team's the best and your team's not, then you're prioritizing your team's success over the other team's failure. Shlomo HaMelech was able to pick up. One woman keeps saying, B'nech hamet, your son's dead, B'nei achai, mine's the live one. And the other woman, who's the real mom, kept saying, B'nei achai, mine's the live one, B'nech hamet, yours is the dead one. She had in the forefront of her mind, mine's the live one, mine's the live one, mine's the live one. The other one kept thinking, yours is the dead one, or kept saying, yours is the dead one, yours is the dead one, because that negativity, that automatically meant that she was guilty. Says the Malbim. Shlomo HaMelech in his wisdom knew that. He just needed to find a way to prove it, so he said, let's cut the baby in half. But he already knew. Havem zahir lachkor et hayadim. You need to be very careful when you investigate the witnesses. Because if not, if you're asking questions in a certain way, you might be, as they call in modern terminology, leading the witness. But we'll see now from the next couple of Mishnayot, there was a lot of corruption going on. I have an hour class on each one of the Mishnayot, but I figured it's good to get through a few different ideas. You never know what resonates with who. There was a lot of corruption going on. Shmaya v'av telon kiblu mehem. Shmaya and av telon. This is Perek Aleph Mishnah Yud. They say, Shmaya Omer, Ehovet HaMelacha, love work. Usnat HaRabbanut, and hate the rabbinate. V'al titvadel HaRashut, and don't become overly familiar with the government. Right? What does it mean, Ehovet HaMelacha? Ehovet HaMelacha is you need to constantly understand and appreciate that we're here in this world to work. I deal with a lot of teenagers and their attitude is always CBA. Can't be asked, can't be bothered, not interested. Our attitude needs to be, no. I understand I'm put into this world to work. People are only happy. We've discussed many times when we discussed happiness. Happiness is only when people are working hard, when they're accomplishing, when they're growing. I had a woman call me up, it's about 7 or 8 years ago now, and she says, Rabbi, I want you to come speak to my dad. He's a big fan of yours, and he's been having panic attacks. We went to the top therapist, they gave him medicine, it's not helping. I'm not a therapist, but if I can help, I'm happy to help. I sit down with the guy and I said, when are you having these panic attacks? He says, well, Baruch Hashem, a wealthy guy. I used to be very involved in the family business and I used to run the accounts. And now, I'm sitting at home and I'm doing nothing. My wife, she's home till about 10 o'clock. We go for a walk. And then at about 12 o'clock, I start getting these panic attacks. I said, oh, you were a very successful businessman and now you feel like you're not doing anything. You need to be busy. You need to be busy. And if you're busy, then I think you won't have the panic attacks. He says, really? That's your advice? Yeah. Not medication? I said, the doctor gave you medication, take the medication, but that'd be my advice. I call him up a couple weeks later. How's it going? He said, it's definitely better, but I'm still having every once in a while attacks. I said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I volunteered over here, and I went to visit my friend here, and I went out for coffee here. I said, no, sorry, maybe I wasn't specific enough, and I didn't use the right terminology. Don't be busy, be accomplishing. He said, what am I supposed to do? I said, you can work online. He says, I don't know how to use the internet. I don't know how to do the online stuff. I said, I'll find someone. We'll pay them a little bit. They'll teach you. How many websites do you go to already? Yeah, you read the news over here and you check out the game over here and you go and shop over here. You go to 7, 8 websites. Everybody has their favorites. Those are the majority of the websites you go to. We'll set those up as favorites. We'll show you how to use the computer. We'll show you how to do online banking. Once you do it a couple of times, it's relatively simple. And you can be accomplishing. He called me back up. I found him someone. He said, no, I have 2 live-in cleaners. I'll get one of the cleaners. She's going to teach me how to do it. And the rest is history. The guy hasn't had a panic attack since. Why? He's accomplishing. Ehovat HaMelacha, if you're a driven person, you love working, you need to accomplish to feel good about yourself. And if not, then you start stressing out. You need to be accomplishing. His family said to me, we want to go with the whole family to our villa in Spain. He doesn't want to come. I said, wait another few weeks, let him work. In his mind, you go on break when you need a break from working. But if he's not working, what do you need a break for? He doesn't want to come. He started working, he started doing the online banking, he started getting involved in the company. And then I said to him, the family wants to go. Are you ready to go now? He says, yeah, now I'll go. They said, how'd you do that? We've been trying to convince him for weeks. I said, you have to speak his language, but you have to tell him, you need a break from all this work. That's how, the guy loves to work. And we need to train ourselves and train our children. You're here in this world to work. We're here to accomplish. We're here to be doing and mastering and using, fulfilling our potential. And the biggest, most challenging work we can do is right behind me, finishing all the Sfarim, learning Torah. It's not easy. It's not easy, especially when it comes to Shas and Poskim and all the different halacha and all different things. It's not easy. So you know what? Love accomplishing. But please God, you do very well and you know a lot. One second. What just happened here? Sorry about that. So, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I don't know. Someone logged into my account on Zoom. What happens over here? You need to look at the Sfarim, and it's very easy to get scared off. But if you're accomplishing and you're growing and you're learning, Snat Rabbanut doesn't mean hate the rabbis. If you read the English, that's what it might say. Despise the high office. No. Despise the Rabbanut. Don't hate the rabbis, but if you're accomplishing, don't say the reason I'm accomplishing is to become a rabbi because I'm looking for the kavod. Right? Elsewhere in Mishnah and Pirkei Avot it says, anybody who runs after the kavod runs away from them. Anybody who runs away from the kavod runs after them. If you're doing things, so look at me, so people could say, wow, look at what she accomplished. Look at what she did. If that's why you're doing what you're doing, you're not going to be successful. People can sense that, can feel that when someone's looking for the glory, looking for the honor, and it turns people off. What do you have to do over here? Snat harabanut. Work hard, accomplish, be growing in your business, in your organization, in your family, and whatever it might be. Love working hard. Understand you can only be successful when you're accomplishing and you're working hard, but don't do it for the kavod. Don't do it for the respect. I think I mentioned to you my Rosh Hashiva in America. He didn't use these exact words, but he basically said, when I was younger, I would read the Musar books, and I never understood, why don't they talk about practical things? Desire for money, desire for beautiful women. A lot of these books talk about kavod and honor, and you should be humble. He says, I never understood it. He says, now I'm in my 70s. I got a long beard. I got a nice belly. There's a beautiful woman walking down the street. I ain't looking at her. She ain't looking at me. You gave me $1 million. I'm going to do $1 million. I have my house. I have my car. $1 million. I'd give it to my kids. I go to Israel once a year. That's enough for me. What do I need to go? What do I need to do? He says, you know what my desire is? Kavod. Kavod. You know how many students I've inspired? Do you see this beautiful, magnificent building that I've been able to build for the yeshiva? Oh, if you know how many people that have been through these doors that we've connected. He said the guys writing these Musar books weren't in their 20s and 30s. Now, of course, they do discuss the other things, but not as much as the biggest ta'ava as you get older. The biggest desire is for kavod. People to say, wow, look what an amazing family she has. Look at how well behaved her kids are and her grandkids are. And it's true, it's a beautiful thing. I got a message this week. Somebody messaged me, which the fact that they even messaged me is already shows how thoughtful they are. It's another rabbi. And the rabbi over here in London, Rabbi Hamer, he messages me. He says, your son came to study with my son, and my wife and my daughter, they were saying how amazing his midot are, and he really made a good impression. I said, Baruch Hashem, I'm very lucky. He's a good boy. Now, first of all, that's a beautiful thing to send someone a message. You know, your kid came over, they really behaved nicely. It's very special. But, you get a lot. That's the kavod. It's kavod. That's not why you do it. It's an added bonus. But you shouldn't be doing it so that people could say, look at where my kid goes to school. That often leads to a lot of problems. If you say, my kid must go to school here, my kid needs this and must have this. No, every kid is different. And we'll see in the next Mishnah, we should have enough time, exactly what, where, why, when. But we need to love working, but snat rabanu, don't do it so that you can have the position of power. It's not why I'm doing it. If you work hard and you're accomplishing, chances are you will work your way up the ladder in whatever field it is, whether it's as a mom, whether it's as a professional, whatever it might be. That's amazing. But don't do it for the kavod. And atit vadala rashut. Now that quite often, if you worked hard, you accomplished. You're going to have political connections. You're going to be up there with the aristocratic people. And especially if you become someone who's on the board of this and the this or that, you're going to be involved with the rich people. You're going to be involved with the government, with the politics, whatever it might be. Slow down. Don't become too buddy-buddy. Why? Because unfortunately, a lot of times there's corruption. Especially in that generation. We mentioned those generations, there was loads of corruption. Loads of corruption. Some say this is referring to the Kohanim Gedolim. During the second Bet HaMikdash was around for 420 years. There was over 300 different Kohanim Gedolim. 300 different Kohen Gadol. Why? because they wanted the kavod, and they would bribe the right guys. They were connected with the right government officials, and therefore they got the job as Kohen Gadol. They would walk into the holiest of holies on Yom Kippur, and they would be pulled out by the rope around their leg, because they were just looking for the kavod. They just did it for the honor. They worked hard. They were accomplished. They were, successful businessmen. But then they bought the rights to things that they didn't warrant and didn't deserve just because of the kavod. Be careful when you're dealing with the government. I was talking to a guy from South Africa, and the guy from South Africa, he was going through his books, and he said to me that he realized that the government did something in his favor and he had extra money. Should he give back the money? And he asked a halachic question, and the guy said, this is years ago, said, there's such corruption in the government, it's just going to go into someone's pocket. It's not going to go back into the government pool. Whoever you send that email to, whoever you let know that there's been a mistake, they're just going to pocket it. There's so much corruption, there's no doubt, the rabbi said, better to give it to a communal cause. Again, that's extreme, and Baruch Hashem, we don't live in that type of society. But there's oftentimes corruption. The word politics is unfortunately synonymous with lying, cheating, and stealing. Oh, and over there in that business, there's a lot of politics. It means that people are fighting with each other and someone's messing over somebody. In that shul, in that school, there's a lot of politics. It's not the way it's supposed to be. Ideally, you want to have everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same goal and everyone sees things in the same way. Don't be looking for the kavod. Work hard. Now, Baruch Hashem, you worked hard, you're successful. Human nature is the kavod, the desire for wanting to be the rabbi, be the one in charge, being the head of the organization, being the head. It's my way or the highway. I said this. It's not a rabbanut. Despise it. It should turn you off. I'm not interested in being involved. I do what I got to do because the community needs it. But this isn't something I really want to do. This isn't the ideal. You said to me, Levy, you want to be a rabbi? I never planned on being a rabbi, but I felt there's an achrayut. My rabbi always told us, if there's something you can do, or there's something that only you can do or only you're willing to do, then that's your responsibility. Now, I'm not trying to be humble by any means. I don't know much. I prepare a class, I try and give it over, and hopefully it resonates with people. I figure if I find it thought-provoking, hopefully other people will. So why did I become a rabbi? There's a mashal from the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim was one time at one of these Aguda conventions. And, they have all the top rabbis. And he got up and he spoke about how people need to go do for the community. And people need to go help. And there's people out there that are, majority of people aren't religious, of Jews aren't religious. We need to inspire them, connect them. And he finished speaking, and over the next day, he felt that a lot of people were like, it's not for me, who am I, how am I going to do it? So he went over to the organizer and said, I want to speak again. Now there's a very timed out schedule, but this is the Gadol Hador. You can't tell the Chafetz Chaim knows. Chafetz Chaim said, give me 5 minutes. Said, okay, for 5 minutes, the Chafetz Chaim gets back up there to speak. People looking at their schedule, there's not on the schedule. And Chafetz Chaim says, I mentioned yesterday, we need to all go out there and do for the Kihila. And I heard a lot of murmuring, who am I, what am I? He says, I'll tell you one mashal. He says, there was once a town, and in this town, they were quite third world, and they didn't have much. And a rich guy moves into town. He turns on the tap, and he sees that in the water, he puts out his cup. In the water, there's some sand. So he sits down with a few of the government officials in that town, and he says, I moved to this town, I turn on the water, I put out my cup, at the bottom there's sand. They say, yeah, look, it's very expensive to be able to get a filter, to filter all the water of the city. What are we supposed to do? He says, I can't live in such a city, and you're going to stay, no one's going to want to move here when they hear about this, you need to up your game. So it's very expensive. He says, I'll pay for it. And we'll slowly but surely raise the taxes, but in the immediate future, I'll pay for it. We need to up our game. All the water that comes through the pipes needs to be filtered. Okay. Everybody in town is very excited. They have clean water finally. And after a few months, unfortunately, there was a fire. And they called the fire department. And the fire department comes. They do whatever they're able to do. But a whole road with many, many houses burned down. So this new rich guy who came to town, he wants to get involved, make sure the city is a better city. He sits down with the board of deputies, with the communal leaders, and he says, what happened? How could it be? This is unacceptable that the whole road burned down. We have to have a better system. And they said, this is your fault. He said, my fault? How's it possibly my fault? He says, we got there, and by the time we filtered out all the water, it already spread to most of the houses. The rich guy says, Ahabal, you fool. You filter out the water when you need to drink it, but when there's a fire, you don't filter the water, you do whatever you got to do. It doesn't matter if the water is perfect or not. You do everything possible to put out the fire. Chafetz Chaim said, maybe generations ago, the rabbis, they were filtered, they were pure, they were 100%. And to be a rabbi, you had to be in your 40s or 50s or 60s and very accomplished and very knowledgeable and know everything. He says to the people at the convention, Rabotai, Klal Yisrael's on fire. There's so many people throwing away their Judaism. We're on fire. So even if you don't think you know it all, and even if you don't think you're ready, you do everything you can to save the people. That's your responsibility. That's your achrayut. How could you not do everything you possibly can to go out there and make a difference in the schools, in the shuls, in the organizations, and whatever capacity you're able to, you get involved. When you see that there's problems, when you see that Klal Yisrael is on fire, you need to go out there and help. And even if that means once a week, you get a group together and you try and teach, or you organize a group and you bring in the teacher. Whatever it might be. You do everything you possibly can to say, hey, I'm going to make a difference. Is it easy to organize a group to people to come learn? Or easy to organize, one of these matching campaigns, or whatever it might be that you feel, I'm going to do my best to try and help? Of course it's not easy. Love the fact that you know it's going to take hard work. And understand that that's the only way you can accomplish. But snat rabbanut, hate the kavod that comes with that. Wow, look at what she accomplished, look at what she did, unbelievable, wow, she's so amazing, everybody loves her, she's so great. That's not why you're doing it. It might be true, but that's not why you do what you do. Be very careful when it comes to the government, that you don't end up being corrupt. You don't end up doing things that we know are incorrect, and convince yourself, look, they did me a favor, now I owe them a favor. How could I say no? After what she did for me, I have to say yes. But it's not good, it's not exactly right, it's not so yashar. What am I supposed to do? I can't say no. You owe them. We have to make sure, no. His haru, we need to be very careful. Right, that's the next Mishnah. We'll go through it quickly. Avtalon omer, chachamim hizaru b'divrechem. Be very careful in what you say, how you say what you say. Shema tachovu chovat galut. Because maybe there'll be people who end up in exile. V'yitkelul makom mayim hara'im. They'll go to bad water. V'yishtu hatalmidim abei macharehem v'yamutu. And the next generation of people will go out there and they'll drink these waters and they'll die. V'nimtza Hashem shamayim et chalel. And it end up being that there'll be a chilul Hashem. The rabbi is saying, you need to be very careful where you go and what you do and how you say what you say. Right? Now again, that generation, they had a lot of problem from the tzidukim and the baitosim. The third Mishnah in Perek Aleph talks about Antignosh Isocho, says, don't just serve God in order to get reward. So these people said, well, we're not going to get rewarded? Lo tzarich, what do we need this for? We don't want the headache. And they opened up their own section of Judaism that they only believed in the oral Torah. The written Torah, not the oral Torah. So that caused a lot of problems. That was a big issue. And they were the ones that influenced the Anai HaMelech and caused a lot of the corruption. They're the ones who were causing all the problems for the religious rabbis. So the rabbi says, all we're dealing with is headache, because this rabbi generations ago wasn't necessarily careful enough with what he said, how he said it, and wasn't clear enough. You need to be very clear. Not only that, if you have, the Gemara in Makot discusses, you have a rabbi and his student kills by accident, then he too needs to go to Galut. He needs to go with his student to exile, to cities of refuge. And if you end up going to certain places, right? You have a guy, he wants to buy a house. He's got £1 million. Now, what £1 million gets you in Hemden and Golders Green is a teeny little, maybe 3-bedroom that's falling apart. So he says, I'll go to wherever it might be, Totridge. Over there, I can get a 6-bedroom with a swimming pool. Yeah, but now when it comes to the next generation, they don't have a shul to go to that they feel comfortable. And that they're not willing to walk a half hour like you are. And they get influenced by the mayim hara'im, by the water that's tainted, by the water that's not pure, by the Torah. Torah is compared to water that might be diluted. V'yishtu, and then they get influenced from this dirty water. V'yamutu, and they end up dying. So you gave up having a bigger house, but taking away the environment. Often people call me up, should I send my kid to a non-Jewish school or a Jewish school? And every situation is its own situation. But more often than not, I'll say you can subsidize education. You can get tutors. You can't subsidize friends. It doesn't work. Can't subsidize friends. We need to make sure that we're living in the right places. We're giving our children and our students the right type of water. Because if they're drinking the wrong ideology, be careful what they're watching online and who their friends are as much as we possibly can. Why? Because if it's not good, if the Torah, they're trying to drink Torah, but it's not being fed to them in the right way, they're going to drink this water, v'yamutu, they die. And then there's a chilul Hashem, because spiritually they're dead, so they start doing things they shouldn't be doing. People say, oh look, that's what the Jewish people do. Oh, that's what this guy, what family he came from. It's not even talking about you. You might be strong enough to be able to fight those temptation and the surrounding influences. But the children, the students that come after the ones who, and they don't really know or don't really understand that they're going to drink from these waters that are dirty, from the hashkafa that has been tainted, and then chas v'shalom, there's chilul Hashem, which is his own class, about how terrible chilul Hashem is. But here's just a few mishnayot, hopefully something, I went through a lot of them quickly, resonate with everybody, things that we can in our own daily lives, day in, day out. How we judge people, are we being judges? Are we doing things for kavod? Are we being corrupt? Are we being influenced in ways we shouldn't be influenced? Are we going to a third party that's objective and not going to be able to, be nogea b'davar and say, well, you want this and you want that. You don't realize that the person who's telling you this, they only have this point of view and this person has that. Get the big picture. Always hear both sides of every story. Right? Over here in town, there's one of the shuls, and I heard one side of the story, and you're like, okay, it makes sense. But then you hear the other side of the story, you're like, wait a second, that's not so simple. If anything, I hear this side more than I hear that side. But first, I only hear both sides of the story, weigh up all the options, try and make sure you're not nogea b'davar, and you're not going to be the one that, anyways, it's politics and there's nothing you can gain from it, usually. But you go out of your way and you try and make sure that you're thinking and that when you're judging, because everybody judges. You hear about politics, you judge. Both sides are guilty. But when it ends up being, you say both sides were right from their point of view, and therefore nobody was trying to do anything that was wrong, and everybody had good intentions. Unfortunately, sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but ultimately everybody, I get where they were coming from. I totally get it. Makes sense. And that's why you go to the Beit Din, you go to the higher party, you go to people. In our daily lives, we're always judging. It's human nature. Don't make yourself orech din. Don't make yourself a judge. Again, your kids come crying, you got to hear both sides of every story. Ask what happened. Try and make sure that you're understanding and you got the whole picture. And make sure that when you choose which environment you're going to be in, you choose to be in an environment where the mayim tovim, where the water is good, as opposed to might be better in theory, physically, but not spiritually, and that will end up leading to death spiritually. It's a heavy terminology. That's what the Mishnah says. They're going to drink v'yishtu mayim hara'im v'yamutu, and then shem shamayim mitchalel. We have to do everything we can to always be upstanding and be emet and not get involved in the corruption and the politics and looking for the kavod. That's usually where the politics come from. Every side feels, I did this and therefore I warrant that, and I gave this and I have this and I did that. Human nature. We're human beings. But this is the time of the year, Shavuot. We work on ourselves week after week after week to be able to receive the Torah. We try and stay away from all the politics. We try and stay away from judging. And no matter what, we try and be in an environment that is emet, that is true, and that is an environment that there's no corruption involved. Have a great day.